Today, we're diving into a really important paper on the real-world safety of transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. What we're looking at is a huge 10-year analysis of data that was submitted directly to the FDA. This gives us a unique window into how this therapy actually performs out in the wild, outside the controlled environment of a clinical trial.
So why is a study like this so critical? Well, as you know, TMS is being used for more and more conditions, everything from depression to helping people quit smoking. The thing is, those initial clinical trials, as good as they are, aren't really designed to catch rare side effects or things that might pop up later in a much broader population. This created what the authors call a surveillance deficit, basically a blind spot in our safety data. This study, well, it aims to fill that exact gap by digging into 10 years of real-world reports.
Here's the game plan for how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at how the study was set up, the methods. Then, we'll jump into the core data, the trends in reporting and the specific symptoms people experienced. After that, we'll shift gears to the hardware and the technology, and then we'll wrap it all up with the big so what this all means for doctors and patients.
All right, let's get into it. Part 1, the surveillance gap and the methods. It's so important to understand how the researchers built their foundation because it's what makes their findings credible. The process here was incredibly systematic. The authors started by pulling all 230 reports related to FDA-cleared TMS systems. Then they did the hard work. They went through each one manually to deduplicate them, comparing dates and the story of what happened to make sure every single event was only counted once. This painstaking work left them with a clean, final set of 200 unique reports, and that's the data set for this entire analysis.
Okay, on to part 2, adverse event reporting trends. This is where we start to see what the numbers are actually telling us, starting with the big picture of how reporting has changed over the last decade.
When you look at the data over time, something really jumps out. Before 2021, the number of reports was pretty low and steady, less than 15 a year. But then, starting in 2022, that number tripled. Now, the authors make a really crucial point here. The spike doesn't mean TMS suddenly got less safe. No, it's much more likely that it reflects the therapy's growing popularity, more people seeking care after the pandemic, and just a greater awareness that, hey, these events should be reported. So if we break down those 200 reports, the distribution is pretty stark. The huge majority, we're talking nearly 95%, are classified as injury. Then you have a small slice for malfunctions, and just 2 reports, about 1.2%, classified as death. But, and this is a big but, it is absolutely critical we understand what these labels actually mean in the FDA's database.
We have to be really clear about this term injury. In the MAUDE database, this is a very broad category, and it's chosen by whoever's filing the report. It could be a patient, a doctor, or the company. It does not automatically mean that permanent damage happened, and it certainly doesn't prove that the TMS device was the cause. It's just a signal that a potential harm was reported. That's it.
And in that same vein, we have to handle the death classification with extreme care and precision. The authors of the paper looked at these 2 cases very closely. What they found was that these were complex situations, specifically involving substance-related overdoses. Their conclusion was that there was no direct causal link to the TMS device itself. This distinction is absolutely vital for an accurate picture of the safety profile.
All right. Let's move on to what is maybe one of the most clinically important sections. Part 3, clinical symptom distribution and analysis. So what were patients and their doctors actually reporting?
Within those 200 reports, there were a total of 645 individual symptoms mentioned. So what's at the top of the list? Well, the most common was anxiety at about 8.2%, followed right behind by neurocognitive changes at 8.0%. And then tied for third, you have convulsions or seizures and headache, both coming in at 6.9%. So let's do a little deep dive on a few of these.
Okay, seizures. We know this is a risk with TMS, but it's a rare one. Now, even though seizures make up almost 7% of the reports in this database, we have to put that number in context. The broader medical literature estimates the actual rate is incredibly low, something like 0.31 for every 10,000 sessions. The paper also points out that the risk factors are often things like not following established treatment protocols or a patient being on other medications that can make a seizure more likely.
Now, the high number of reports that mention neurocognitive changes, things like brain fog or memory issues, that's really interesting. Why? Because it stands in sharp contrast to the data from controlled trials which just haven't found any consistent cognitive problems caused by TMS. So what's going on?
The authors suggest a few possibilities. Maybe patients in the real world are just more sensitive to these changes, or the symptoms could be related to their underlying illness, or it could even be a nocebo effect. That's basically the evil twin of the placebo effect, where just the negative expectation of a side effect can actually cause you to experience it.
And what about hearing-related symptoms, like tinnitus or ringing in the ears? This one's pretty straightforward. It's a direct mechanical issue. The magnetic coil makes a loud clicking sound that can hit 120 decibels. To put that in perspective, the US safety limit for workplace noise is just 85 decibels. So this finding isn't just an interesting piece of data, it's a non-negotiable directive for clinics. Properly fitted hearing protection is an absolute must for every single TMS session. Period.
All right, let's shift gears to Part 4, Device Issues and Tech Advancements. Here, we're going to move from patient symptoms to the hardware itself and how it's getting better and safer over time. When you break down the reports by the company that made the device, Neuronetics has the largest slice of the pie at about 45%. But, and the authors are crystal clear on this point, this is not a safety scorecard. This distribution almost certainly just reflects each company's market share and how many treatments are being done on their machines. It's not a head-to-head safety comparison.
Now this number, 41%, really highlights a major challenge in the real world. In over 2/5 of all reports, an adverse event happened, but nobody could find a specific problem with the device or how it was being used. This was actually the most common device problem listed, which just goes to show how tough it can be to figure out the root cause when something goes wrong.
And here's an operational problem with a real public health impact. On average, it took over 6 months from the time an event happened to when the FDA actually received the report. Some reports were delayed by years. That kind of lag makes it incredibly difficult for regulators to spot new safety signals quickly and act on them.
But the good news is, the technology is not standing still. The paper points to some key innovations that are making TMS safer all the time. We're talking about better coil designs that can target brain regions with more precision, more advanced electronics that carefully shape the magnetic pulse to lower risks, and, of course, new protocols that can even personalize treatment using a patient's own MRI scan.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, Clinical Implications and Summary. So what does all of this data mean for the people on the front lines, the clinicians and patients using TMS every day?
Now, before we land the plane with the big takeaways, it's really important to be honest about the limitations here, which the authors do a great job of. First, this is a passive database, which means it definitely suffers from underreporting. Second, and this is a big one, we don't have a denominator. We don't know the total number of TMS sessions given, so we can't calculate the true rate of these events. And finally, data like this can show us correlations, but it can't prove cause and effect.
Okay, keeping those limitations in mind, we can still pull out some clear, actionable advice for clinics. This data really underlines the need for standardized patient screening and education, especially around things like seizure risk. It doubles down on the idea that hearing protection has to be mandatory. It also suggests clinics should prioritize using devices with the latest safety features. And of course, it's a huge call to action for everyone to commit to reporting events in a timely manner.
So, after sifting through a decade of data and 200 unique adverse event reports, what's the bottom line? What are the most crucial messages we should all be taking away from this massive safety analysis?
Here are the 4 big take-home messages. First, serious adverse events with TMS are rare. The vast majority of what gets reported is clinical and not fatal. Second, vigilance is key. Clinicians have to be on the lookout for key symptoms like anxiety, seizures, and tinnitus, and they need to educate their patients. Third, innovation is driving safety forward. New hardware and better protocols are actively reducing old risks. And finally, number 4, we need better reporting. To keep making neuromodulation safer for everyone, we absolutely have to fix the reporting delays and get better at finding the root cause of problems.